Thanks for joining us and welcome to Getting Started in ESG webinar today. I'd like to first start with an acknowledgement of country. As we virtually gather for this meeting, it's good to take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place and in doing so recognise the various traditional lands on which we meet today. On behalf of the panel, we acknowledge elders, past, present and emerging, and pay respect to them for the land we work and live on today. Before we get started, there's some information around today's session. Lovely Jess from Socialsuite is going to moderate today. She will manage any questions in the chat. And if there are more questions than we get through today, don't worry, we'll come back to you after the session. As you will appreciate, the timing is very tight with a huge topic to tackle. We'll do our best. I think consider this session a tasting plate of ESG. I'm sure that your interest will be sparked and that you'll want to know more. I'll introduce the enthusiastic ESG experts on the panel. My name's Erin. I'm the Executive Director of CSR, Social Performance and ESG at Element. Tim Siegenbeek and Heukelom, sorry Tim, worse than before, Global Head of ESG Socialsuite, and Brett Giddings, Sustainability Impact Director at Trace. We look forward to your questions, which we'll address at the end of the session. We're going to share our knowledge about ESG with you from our various areas of expertise. So the promotion of the term ESG seems to be everywhere. To quickly illustrate my point, let me ask you, who has heard of ESG? Well, prior to signing up to this webinar, of course. Who has heard of Kim Kardashian? I think most hands are going up in the room, even though I can't see them. Who do you think gets more Google hits? You may be surprised to know that a random search on Google conducted at the same time, there were 2.3 billion hits for ESG versus 416 million hits for Kim Kardashian. That means there are 5 times as many Google searches for ESG than for Kim Kardashian, whose fame is equated with internet presence for all sorts of things. It's proof that ESG is a hot topic and that people are searching to know more. So I think it's important to cover what are the E, S and G. They stand for environment or environmental, social and governance. There's a lot of detail in these, so I'll give you a quick summary. 3 key factors under environment include waste and pollution, resource depletion, and greenhouse gas emissions. 3 key factors that come under social include diversity, equity and inclusion, human rights, and community support. Under governance, 3 factors include demonstration of good governance, clear purpose statements, and the ability to demonstrate compliance and adherence to rules and regulations. I took the time to pull this slide together. I wanted to show that ESG is not new. This timeline shows that ESG is a concept that has been evolving for the last 50 years. I know this is a very detailed slide, so I'll point out 3 key events. In 1970, Milton Friedman introduced the social responsibility of business as a theory. In 1997, 25 years ago, the Kyoto Protocol introduced the idea of greenhouse gas emissions targets. And only 7 years ago, the United Nations Sustainability Goals were introduced and have become very recognisable as synonymous with ESG frameworks and goals. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Sustainable Development Goals, often referred to as SDGs or global goals, are a collection of 17 interlinked global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. They are designed to be countrywide goals and underpinned by countrywide indicators that are intended to be achieved by the year 2030, which is actually coming along much faster than they may have thought when they put these together. SDGs are also used by many organisations as an underpinning framework for ESG and corporate social responsibility activity. It's important to note that whilst deceptively simple and colourful and seemingly straightforward and well used, There is a lot of detail underpinning these goals, and the measurement under the indicators is quite difficult when taken from a business, not country perspective. I want to reassure you that it's okay to be confused. Managing ESG is complex and complicated for larger organisations who are in the thick of it, and ESG has become a growth sector on its own. Whilst this slide says over 600 ratings, the latest report from McKinsey's management consultant says that there are now over 2,000 frameworks, requirements, methodologies, and protocols, with over 1,400 potential performance indicators underneath these. It's also referred to as acronym soup. So it can be very confronting to get started in this space, but Tim will talk to you about ways to simplify reporting and disclosure with ESG Go from Socialsuite and ways that it can help a little later in the presentation. I think a simple way to think about ESG management is to group it under key activities. As you can see on the slide, it can be broken down into involving frameworks, memberships, awards, and indices. And you may recognise some of the logos there. Your business or organisation is part of an ecosystem. So if it was an ocean environment, it would be fair to say that the whales, say the top 100 ASX companies, if you take an Australian perspective, are already operating within an ESG-rich regulatory environment. They have teams of people managing this work. They use it to position for competitive advantage. They have mandatory and legislative requirements. Investors and consumers are very interested in what's happening in this space. And some companies are making extra investments to become things like B Corps. But other factors that will affect multiple organisations will include the Australian federal government's commitment to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. So they're going to start to look to each government department to help achieve and measure this outcome. Additionally, there will be extra taxes for all of us and all organisations. Things like fuel, electricity and water will get more expensive to account for carbon offsets in the future. So if you think about it, at this stage, many businesses in the supply chain and in the ecosystem can look at ESG voluntarily, but eventually even the zooplankton businesses will be directly impacted by ESG. So it's best to start thinking about it now. So I suggest you look at ESG as an opportunity about doing good business. And by this, I mean the way you do business. In my extensive experience in CSR, we used to do business and then we used to do good. So on the side of business, we did things like community investment and employee volunteering. But the ESG framework or thinking or paradigm needs to be part of the way you do business. Some refer to this as being baked in, not bolted on. And so this webinar isn't focused on the compliance piece around ESG, meaning things that are not by law or mandatory, but other significant benefits that can be gained by early and efficient adoption of ESG practices. And some of the benefits are in the slide there. So I think it's important to think about some of the business activity that you're already undertaking. If you look at your organisation now, it's likely that you're already working in some of the areas that come under ESG. And if you are now more aware of ESG, you can start on ESG where you're strongest and where it's most important to your business, your stakeholders, and your customers. The most important message to share with you about ESG is that it's a journey. It's not a destination. It's not a place that you will arrive at suddenly. It's a way of doing things. So like risk management or resource management, it'll be part of the way you run your business. I think it's really also important to note that saying you are doing things is more damaging in the long term. There are many terms that cover this, things like virtue signalling or greenwashing, and it will just send you backwards in reputation and credibility. You need to be accountable, authentic, and transparent in your ESG actions. And good ESG is underpinned by measurement and reporting, not just saying. So I'm going to finish on my part of the presentation by talking to you about an area, the social area of ESG. And there's some very simple examples on the slide. I like this one from Crown Casinos, who demonstrate their commitment to diversity and inclusion with a concept called Crownability, showcasing the employment of people with disability. Is this something that's possible for your organisation? Did you know Bank Australia is the only bank in the world with a conservation reserve? And each Bank Australia customer is part owner of the reserve. This partnership with Greening Australia is a strong differentiator in the banking sector. As diversity, equality and inclusion is important, it might be time to think about working on a reconciliation action plan and being recognised by Reconciliation Australia. As promised, coming up in this session, Tim will cover off some of the areas of governance, and Brett will talk to you about some ideas, practical ideas in the environment sector. I'll now hand over to Brett, and he can talk to you about becoming carbon neutral and climate positive. Thanks. You right, Brett?
Thanks, Erin. I realised I didn't clarify who's driving the slides.
Yes, I can do it for you.
Thank you, boss. Cool. So thanks for having me today. The E space in ESG is obviously a huge area. And, you know, we're really going to focus today on carbon and climate change. Erin, I think I'm getting a bit of, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so we're really going to focus within the environmental component. We're going to focus solely on carbon today. You know, we can expand that in the future. And really, you know, just to kind of put a point on where I'm coming to, you know, from this and within this, I work for an organization called Trace, and we're all about making it easy for every business out there to take positive action on climate change. And it's about taking action today. So the thing that makes, you know, Trace, we're a technology platform. The thing that makes, you know, what we do a little different is, you know, in the past, to understand your carbon footprint and to take action on climate change, you really would have been, you know, spending quite a bit of time, you know, measuring and understanding and getting a good grasp on what your carbon footprint is. We use technology to help you, as it says there, leave a positive trace. Next slide, please, Erin. So I think it's good to frame, you know, any problem, you know, with a why. Like, why are we here? Why are we talking about the SDGs? Why do the SDGs have a 10-year time frame? So Erin mentioned 2030. The reason, you know, they have a 2030 timeline is, you know, we've really got 10 years to make a potentially positive impact on climate change. You know, reversing that on its head, if we haven't reached what we call net zero emissions by 2050, then, you know, we really are going to come into and set in motion unavoidable climate change, what some people call runaway climate change. So for your business, the why can be, you know, different. You might not be looking towards a 2030 timeframe. But for me, as an individual, my why is, you know, one of my daughters out there. So I think it's good when you're doing any of this ESG stuff is to really frame the why. Next slide, please, Erin. You know, I dropped the word net zero in there. Erin mentioned it earlier, but I think it's important to kind of pause, you know, and for none of us to assume that we understand what net zero is, because frankly, the word's been used in such a variety of different ways. I'm not going to put out what I consider to be the definition of net zero. This is just the definition that we use at Trace, which is, you know, essentially it's a point in time when the emissions, that when you're not putting out any more emissions into the atmosphere. And for us, we see net zero as something that's like future looking. It's really focused around targets. And achieving what, you know, this net zero emission target over over a time frame. So, underpinning it all is balance. So it's really about understanding what your emissions are today, doing everything you can to avoid and reduce those emissions moving forward, and then looking at those remaining emissions and finding ways to address those. The immediate way that you can address those emissions is through carbon offsets. So it's really a combination of all these things to achieve this net zero balance. And again, saying that you're going to achieve net zero next week or next month is really unrealistic. It's about a longer term goal and setting, timeframes to achieve that. Erin? Another word we're throwing in there is a carbon offset or a carbon credit. And really a carbon credit or a carbon offset is essentially 1 ton of CO2 that's been removed or avoided through a project. The projects that are used to sequester carbon should always be independently verified. And essentially what that means is, a body is measuring and verifying the amount of carbon that's being sequestered through those projects, so that you can say, okay, I've understand my carbon footprint was 10 tons. I've done everything I can to reduce those emissions to 5 tons. That remaining 5 tons I'm going to offset, and hand on heart that those 5 tons have been offset. And there's all sorts of different carbon offset projects out there, all sorts of projects that produce carbon credits. There's the things that we think of like, reforestation and forest protection. But there's also renewable energy projects and community-based projects that are helping, communities in developing countries shift towards, more sustainable ways of cooking, etc. Erin? So, I'm assuming most of the audience here are small businesses or businesses at the start of their ESG journey. What are it's good to take pause and think about what the barriers are to taking action, like when putting yourself in our shoes. Measuring CO2 emissions has traditionally been cumbersome and expensive. There's tools like Trace that are out there that basically, take that piece away from you. Carbon markets are complex and pricing is volatile. So, it can be challenging to understand whether or not a project is good or bad. So it's important to go through, an organization that you trust to find the carbon credits that, that are not just quality, but also are aligned to the story that your organization wants to tell about creating a positive impact through carbon offsetting. And thirdly, pricing is volatile. So right now, the carbon offset market is significantly is increasing in price significantly. It's set to continue on very much an upwards trajectory. So, that's not something as a business that you want to try and manage, or you generally wouldn't want to try to manage internally. And then finally, the one thing about carbon offsetting that we find is quite common with small businesses is, carbon is boring. It's not something that is easy to communicate to internal and external stakeholders. So you want to find a partner out there that isn't just helping you to, understand and talk about carbon, but talk about the positive impact that you're creating by addressing your carbon emissions. I feel like I've rushed through that significantly.
Thanks, Brett. I know we set ourselves a really tough timing issue, so I'm going to make sure Tim gets through his material, and then we'll grab some questions at the end. Thanks, Brett. Or did you want to talk to this, Brett? We'll just, I think we'll keep going for time. Is that all right?
No, I think we'll have to move on. Yeah.
There you go, Tim.
Excellent. All right, I'll talk a little bit, like Erin said today, about actually doing ESG reporting, how hard it is, and how can you get started. And from what we've seen is that, as Erin already mentioned, that large companies, the multinationals, the ASX 100, it's nothing new to them. They've been reporting for a long time. But how can you get started as a small or medium-sized company? And how can you then demonstrate progress and really get to a point where you embed ESG reporting into your operations, into your business as usual, into your governance, and make sure that it's not this bolted on approach, but it becomes a core part of your, on the one hand, financial disclosures, and then your non-financial disclosures, your ESG reporting, making sure it becomes embedded in your organization. We help companies do that, and we'll talk a bit more about that process in the next few minutes. So what we've seen is that the key problems that are out there is really the hurdles and the challenges that small, medium-sized companies have to get a head around ESG. So on the one hand, it is, what does it all mean? There is that awareness level. Then often we see that moves into an urgency that we need to act. We need to do something today, not tomorrow, like Brett said on carbon as well. But the problem then is that you're a small organization and you realize you don't have the internal sustainability or ESG expertise. You feel not ready. You see all these reports from big organizations out there and you feel we don't have any of that. So let's defer this till later. You don't have the resources. You can't afford one of the big four accounting firms to come in and do it all for you. And even if you had someone internally who potentially could do some work on it, it's very complex. We've seen it on that slide that Erin showed us earlier. There is this massive amount of frameworks of ratings, rankings, scoring. How do you approach this if you don't have full understanding of what ESG looks like? Now, that's a problem that we're trying to help you overcome. And the starting point in then is really trying to work out, how do you report? How do you pick one of those acronyms, one of those frameworks to get started as a small or medium-sized company? So the first element there is about reporting. It's really about finding a way to disclose your ESG metrics in a standardized, comparable, and recognized way. And then in doing that, that's almost a gap analysis on where can you be better? Where can you improve your ESG metrics? And we provide coaching and resources and experts to help you do that. You're driving it yourself, the process around progressing through. But through that reporting and progression you're making, a core element that a lot of companies often basically kind of leave a little bit on the side is the visibility around it. The core thing here is that your stakeholders at large, so that's all the way from your investors, your shareholders, but also your employees and your customers, they want to see what you're doing there. They don't want just that commitment on paper saying, well, we're doing ESG. They want to see that you're actually on a journey there, building those credentials, and they want to see the reports you generate. They want to see that you share that and that you put into the media and at large in publications where you are in that process. And it's not about being perfect. Stakeholders at large are looking at where are you today and what are you going to do in the next few months, quarters, and year. So it's about that commitment and follow through. Now, we help companies to do that based on a standardized and comparable framework. What's been pulled together by the World Economic Forum, they said, we see all those frameworks out there. What are the top 5 or 6 of those frameworks that a lot of the big companies are reporting on? Can we merge that into one industry agnostic global framework? That's been done through the World Economic Forum by the big 4 accounting firms, launched in 2020 as the stakeholder capitalism metrics. It's been highly recognized, and it's really part of that move that we see now at the International Sustainability Standards Board that was announced at COP26 last year, is finding a common global standard, a single standard to report ESG metrics on. This is a starting point, a precursor of that fully globally agreed framework. And we at Socialsuite are a big supporter of the standardization of ESG. We don't want you to feel that burden of picking one of the 1,200, 1,400, how many there are frameworks. Use the one framework that ideally everyone is using. So that's why we're really trying to help take away some of that complexity there. That framework is built around governance, planet, people, and prosperity. 4 key elements there with these 21 core metrics as a starting point to get started on. And it's really important to go back to Erin's slide about the SDGs. We just had a look at the nice way of looking at the SDGs earlier, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I've mixed them up here. And what I want to show you and talk about for a second is the difference between the SDGs as the global goals that we're all, as a world, as countries, trying to meet. They really are global goals and targets. And ESG is effectively the corporate methods we use to track our corporate progress towards reaching those goals. So how are you as a company contributing to those global goals and those global targets? ESG in itself doesn't set any targets or goals. It asks you to disclose information. And that's why it quite neatly links in. So on the left, we see the four pillars here from the stakeholder capitalism metrics, and how do they link then to those SDGs? So how are the ways that you track your ESG data, your disclosure metrics, what are goals and targets are linked to that? So it's really important to understand that they work together. The goals connect with those ESG disclosures in a really good way, that you as a company can demonstrate how you contribute to those global goals. Starting that journey is something we do. We really help you build capacity for non-financial disclosure, to taking you through phases of onboarding and baseline, all the way to a point that, like I said, it's embedded. It's part of your day-to-day business, part of your operations. And that's the key thing here. It shouldn't be something that you do at the end of the year. It should be something that you do continuously, like your financial reporting. What we help you do then is generate a disclosure report. So a disclosure report is effectively a short 2-3 paragraphs, robust information on each of those metrics. So you have a short, to the point document that you can share with your stakeholders every quarter, ideally, or at the end of the year, and say, this is where we are. We still have work to do, but you can see how we're progressing. Generate your report and show the world what you're doing. It's very important to make sure that you're not seen to be greenwashing. We do that through a project management approach with a dashboard where you can clearly track and use that, help you to input information and track where you are. So it's a really user-friendly platform to make sure that it's easy. It can be managed within a small to medium-sized business with some coaching support from Socialsuite. And ultimately, like I said, we'll help you create your own disclosure report, which you can generate ad hoc at the end of the year, at the end of the quarter. I'll just stop there. And I'm looking forward to see if Jess has collected any questions. I'll hand over back to Erin for now.
Thanks, Tim. We really set ourselves a hard task of fitting a lot of information to half an hour. I think I'm just going to let you know, we'll probably go about 5 minutes over the official time, so we can get some questions in. And, you know, as I said at the outset, this was meant to be a tasting plate and giving you a sort of a broad helicopter overview of ESG. There's so much information we could have focused on, and we've tried to kind of deliver it to you in a palatable lunchtime experience. Obviously, Tim, Brett and I are keen to speak to anyone on the call and answer any of their questions or talk to them about their business needs or just have a conversation, and our contact details will be following after this event. I thought we could probably answer a couple of questions. Jess, did you want to pick some?
Yes, we've got a few great ones. Thank you, everyone. Great points about ESG as a way of doing things and the benefits for companies. But what about, what would you recommend in terms of getting bringing employees on that journey as well on a personal level? So for instance, if on a business level, they ask about a change in their carbon reduction process, a team member might respond, what's in it for me?
Yeah, I'll answer that question, panel, if that's okay. I've had lots of experience in this with different large organisations, and I think you'll find that individuals are more than happy and very excited to get involved. There's lots of ways. There's the employee volunteering way, which is the social side of ESG, and the community corporate partnerships, which people get out, volunteer, give their time, do community grants. So that's one I think that really works well at an individual level. And I've had numerous examples of carbon and energy reduction programs. We had a huge one at a company I worked for, which was called Make an Impact, where we all got a little egg timer for our shower, and that's somewhere kicking around in my house still, probably not adhering to the egg timer as well as I could. But I do remember a very senior person in a large organisation, that's a media organisation in Sydney, going to great lengths to tell me about his bucket shower regime. And that was 10 years ago. And that was there was a mature person who was really interested in the environment. So we have a lot of conversations about worms and chickens at our business. And I think you'll find it is just about bringing it down to concrete, practical, interesting, everyday things. I think that probably, does that answer that question? Does anyone want to chime in? Well, thanks, Jess.
No, thank you. Yeah, great answer. Another one. How should businesses or corporations navigate the ever-changing landscape of ESG, and what standards are investors benchmarking against in terms of ESG regulation? Probably Tim, a bit of that one.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. No, it's a great question, and I think it goes to the core of what's happening right now in the world. Like I referred to, there are so many frameworks out there. Investors have their own preferences for various reasons, the frameworks that they're using. And the problem is that companies get a lot of demand for, we need to understand your ESG metrics and disclosures. So larger companies are now in a position where they might get from a variety of investors and stakeholders, different frameworks, having to report 5, 6, 7 frameworks, which is a massive amount of work, which is not sustainable in the long term. That's why there's a global push now to standardize all those things. So from our perspective at Socialsuite, like I said, we're a big supporter of the standardization there, is to try to find and work together towards a global standard on ESG. That's happening with that ISSB. That's working on that at the moment. The most standardized framework that we believe is out there at the moment is that World Economic Forum Stakeholder Capitalism Metric Framework. If you're starting ESG, if your stakeholders are demanding ESG reporting without a particular preference, that's a great starting point. If they do have particular requirements there, it's always really important to almost go first to your stakeholder materiality assessment. What do they believe is important? So you need to understand what are the frameworks that they require you to report on. That will be a key starting point for most organizations.
Great, thank you. A question for Brett. What's the average carbon footprint of a business per FTE?
I get asked that every day, and it's never a straightforward answer. Like, because obviously it depends on, you know, what you do as an organization and where you're based. But, you know, for a service-based business, so basically for like the organizations on this call, that the average CO2 is between 4 and kind of 7 tons per employee. Is a metric we usually go with.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then, yeah.
And a good comment from Maria. I think we should start talking about halving emissions by 2030, not only net zero by 2050. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Look, if we wait too long, then, you know, that photo of my daughter that I shared earlier becomes, you know, somewhat irrelevant. You know, we start to scramble. Like, we still have time for like a positive outcomes, but the longer we wait, the harder things get.
Exactly. And probably a question for all three of you. We have a small business. Do we really need to bother with ESG?
Yes, you should, totally. I think I would start saying yes. We at Socialsuite, we work with a few number of small businesses that have 1 or 2 employees. They just realize that they should get into this, and Erin, I think, lined it out. The ecosystem requires you to do that. It is a matter of time before it becomes regulated. So start working on that now, but also stakeholder point of view, where they request ESG investors access to capital. It's these days getting harder and harder to get a bank loan or to getting investors invest in your business if you can't show that you're doing something on ESG. You've started that journey, you're building credentials there. And I think the key thing there is, don't expect to be perfect overnight. It's all about starting the journey and working out where you are and coming up with a plan for the next few quarters, years. How are you going to address this? But demonstrate that you're progressing this, you're committing on it. You don't have to be perfect straight away, but it is important to show that you're in the space.
Yeah.
You go, Brett.
Yeah. I think that, sorry, I've got a sick daughter at home today. This question comes up like quite often in terms of, you know, why as a small business should I care about carbon? What impact can I have? But frankly, we're already seeing larger retailers and larger companies start to, put these carbon and ESG focused questions in tenders and RFPs. And if you don't have an answer in real time, then there are already companies starting to miss those opportunities. And I saw an example just last week where a retailer was asking not a product or a packaging supplier, which has been happening for a long time, about carbon footprint, but it was a marketing company asking them, what's your carbon footprint? What are you doing, from a social perspective? If you want to compete in this tender, we need that information.
Yeah, and I'll just we might conclude after this question, just for the timing. But I also think it's super important for employees as well, and that's another place where if you want to grow a business and attract talent, which we all know is kind of an issue at the moment, I think it's your internal stakeholders as well that really are looking for leadership around ESG. And even if you're a small business, people want to know what your values are, what your purpose is, and what your why is. And I think ESG is a really concrete way, or adopting, the framework of ESG, or some of the areas of ESG, even if you just start with one area, like your carbon footprint, or a community program, or a purpose statement, and that is one is an E and one is an S and one is a G. I think you are starting to show, and it's not about talking about it, it's about doing it and making it available to people, that you are committed to a bigger why. And I think that's really important for all of us and all business at the moment. So I might conclude now, because I know we're over time, and I really welcome any feedback from anyone on the call around other topics or further information that they would like. I know we did rush over the top of it, but that was the way we intended this to be for this one. We haven't even begun to discuss breakout groups or workshops or smaller sessions. And if we got enough interest, we could run some of those. We really thank you for your attendance today. We've been thrilled with the response. I know we've been, very active on LinkedIn talking to you about coming along, but it has been really heartening, the number of people who are keen to find out more. You have a lovely rest of the day, and thank you all very much again for coming along.